And I'm passionate about legacies because I think they're a form of funding that works brilliantly for organisations and brilliantly for donors. I think for most of us, it's the one time in our lives where we can make that big, strategic, important financial difference to the causes that we're most passionate about, where we really get, hey, I'm never going to get that experience of writing a £50,000 check to somebody. I just haven't got the money. It's possible that I could leave a legacy of that kind of scope. And it's a way for more ordinary people to really impact organizations. And it's brilliant for charities because it's sustainable income. Actually, it becomes quite predictable income as your program matures. And really crucially, it's usually unrestricted income. And I know that gets into what are very kind of boring topics that preoccupy accounting departments and fundraisers, but big, unrestricted, predictable sources of income are probably something that none of us would want to turn away. And I believe it's an unsaturated part of the market, even in a country like the UK, where legacies have been part of the fundraising landscape for decades, whether the financial backbone of some of the bigger organisations in the country. There's still potential for growth, and there's still potential to find a niche. And I think it's also one of the forms of individual giving fundraising that scales with the size of your organisation, whether you're I hate to talk about organisations in terms of turnover, but it's a ready way of doing it, isn't it? Whether you fundraise £100,000 or £100 million, you're going to have stakeholders and people that care passionately about you, and the same legacy fundraising tactics kind of scale in a way that perhaps other forms of individual giving struggle to.
And I think you were just mentioning that sort of sense of potential for legacy fundraising. And I think maybe that's sort of the thing that we've based this entire sort of session around, really, this idea that perhaps charities aren't necessarily still making the most of legacy fundraising, and they're missing out on potentially quite a lot of income. And I thought perhaps what we might do before we sort of carry on with some of this conversation is just for me to kind of give a little bit of background on that, on sort of why I think we both think this. I mean, I think, legacy fundraising at charities has moved on a lot in the last 20 years. Because, I remember 20 years ago when we were trying to get fundraisers to do proper legacy appeals, people were terrified to even mention the word legacies to donors, but I think it's probably still reasonable to say that most charities probably aren't making the most of their potential for securing legacies, either from their supporters or from the wider public. And I mean, a while back, we at ChangeStar, we talked to a number of charities, both very large and small ones, about their legacy work. And I think we got a few conclusions from it. I mean, one was that many charities either have no real legacy program in place, or their program consists of just a few, what I would call kind of drip feed messages about legacies. So, occasionally sort of mentioning them in newsletters, or sort of hiding them away in ongoing communications. And, and there's a bit of stewardship of pledges. And I think, while those are sort of important parts of a legacy program, that sort of ongoing drip fed communication, they're not enough on their own. And I think many charities that we found, don't have that many direct communications to their supporters about legacies, and they need to. And I think of those that do have that, we found that very few of them send them to all of their supporters or most of their supporters. And they often send them just to kind of quite small select groups. That might be because they think they're being super targeted, or it might be because they're actually a little bit scared to actually send them out to wider groups of people. But actually, again, we're really missing a massive opportunity here to kind of get in touch with people, because it doesn't just have to be really sort of super responsive people, cash donors, that are going to be potential audience for this. It could be even like volunteers and other people, even people who are sort of cash poor but actually have maybe sort of are asset rich. You never know what people have. So I think there is real potential there. And I think just to illustrate that, we could be missing out on a lot of income. So adopting the plan that we're going to talk about today, which is very simple, it could have a massive impact. So, I mean, here's just an example from one of the clients that we've worked with. For 10 years, they did that sort of business as normal approach I was talking about legacy. So kind of drip feeding legacy messages in newsletters and ongoing communications. And the average number of pledges they got per year was about sort of 6. And the potential value of those legacies, would be about £2 million. which is not bad. You know, if it's based on average legacy values, about £2 million. And then for the next 5 years, they tested with us our approach of sort of adding some proper legacy appeals in there. And they kept that going. So they compared the two things, and we obviously one is only for 5 years, one is only for 10. But in that 5 years, each year they got not 6 pledges per year, but 50. So it's a massive increase in the number of pledges they were getting. And the potential value of those pledges was about £8 million. And so if you remember, that's only half as long as the time that they were doing before. This amounts to like potentially 8 times as much legacy income from these people, just by doing some simple, actual, proper legacy asks. So it really is kind of, you know, it's low-hanging fruit, and it's almost like a bit of a no-brainer really when you look at it like that. So, you know, I think the other thing I'd say, you know, maybe there could be an objection to this to go, well, yeah, most of those pledges won't actually convert to leave a legacy, but that's not true. So in that charity's case, about 85% of the pledges who passed away actually left a gift, which is pretty good. But what we found as well is that with the program that we were working on, that sort of the extra set of legacy messages, the conversion rate was even higher, well over 90%. So, you know, that's another reason to be doing a program like this, where you're really talking to people about legacies in a more direct way. I mean, James, I don't know if you've got anything more you would add to that about, you know, why to do it.
I think if you're not doing it, then you end up with a perception. I think that legacies are just a sort of random, pleasant, unexpected event that it's very hard to budget on and plan around. And if your experience of it is that, yes, some years you get 1 or 2 and it's worth a huge amount of money, some years you get nothing, then I think that's the case. I think there's a real value in having a proactive legacy program, in it helps you to properly predict what's going to be able to come in, and with all the benefits of planning and kind of organisation and stability that come with that as well. So not only will it make increase the number of pledges you've got, increase the people's interactions and support for the organisation, but it's got this element of demystifying the income and understanding where it comes from that you can build on as well.
So what would you say are sort of some of the common concerns in charities about legacy fundraising and talking to donors about wills?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's for me, I think there's 3 key ones for an organisation that's never considered legacies for the first time. I think one is a kind of squeamishness question, right, which is conversations about legacies are conversations about death. Who wants to talk about death? And Richard, I remember when we went to, I think we were in Sweden, weren't we? We were talking to an organisation there, and somebody literally says to us, yeah, but Swedish people aren't like the British. They don't like to talk about their own death. And I don't know.
The British love it, of course. The British love
of course. You know, you've not got your cameras on, have you? So I can't say, right, hands in the air if you like talking about death. We don't hear either, but that's not what the conversation is. It's a conversation about possibilities and the longer term impact of something that somebody already cares about. So the first objection is this squeamishness one. The second one tends to be quite a legal objection and an ethics objection. And it's sort of, am I going to be needing to start to give legal advice? Is it ethical for us to be potentially influencing somebody's will? And there's a bit of complexity in that area, but what Richard and I are talking about today is very much legacy marketing. Right? In the UK, you should not be involved in writing somebody's will. You should, perhaps maybe you can have a solicitor you can signpost people to, or take part in things like Make a Wills Week that make it easier for people. But the job of legacy fundraising isn't that legal process stuff. The legal process stuff is actually quite straightforward once you've got somebody in a position where they want to do it. And then the third big objection that I come across is just the long-term nature of legacies. So I mean, this comes from, again, hands up if you've got more budget than you know how to spend. Right? There's a lot of things you could be doing with your money every year, and there's always this push for relatively short-term ROI. And there's a perception that legacy fundraising is something that pays off for the people after the people after the people that come into your job in 20 years' time. And that's not quite the reality either. I think roughly 40%, 50% of the income you would get from a legacy appeal will come in within 5 years of that appeal having gone out, and you will almost definitely see some sort of return within 18 months. So the objection was, it's not about death, it's not legal, it's not massively long term. And then I think once you clear those objections internally, then you've got a platform to start to build your legacy program on.
I think that's fascinating, and I think that sort of statistic about it not being necessarily not this massively long-term income that you're not going to see for decades, I think that's probably quite a winner for a lot of charities as well, in a practical sense.
I mean, don't target 22-year-olds with the communications, but
so moving on from that, then, how, based on some of those worries and things like, how should charities talk to donors about legacies? What are just some, just a handful of really sort of key principles you would say?
Partly, this is true of lots of different types of individual giving and income generation. I think don't talk in euphemisms, don't give vague suggestions about what you want people to do, I think. And yes, talk about legacies quite frequently in your communications, but as part of your program, have very specific communications that talk about why legacies are important to charities. I think what you need to do is minimize the complexity of doing it, because I think a lot of the objections that donors would have would be this idea of it being horrible to visit a solicitor, it's going to be expensive, it's going to be complicated and whatnot. So minimize that, and then sell the real vision of the organization. And I think one of the things that's interesting about legacy communications is they can speak to that kind of horizon that your organization's operating on. So it's not, you get to do a communication that's not, if we don't raise £50,000 by the end of next week, then we can't do this. You can say, we are this far down the road to finding a cure for whatever it is, or this far down the road to research breakthroughs on climate change, or whatever it may be. And Richard, that's something that's stuck in my mind that's different about some of the communications we've worked on together. I remember the Site Savers one was able to kind of cast 30 years back, look 30 years into the future and see what changes happened over that time, what change we could expect to see. I think it's great to be able to fundraise in that vision part of an organization as well, not just in the immediate bang, 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 this needs to pay bills today, pay bills tomorrow sort of place.
Yeah, and I think we're going to, in a few minutes, we're going to go through an example of a legacy pack that we've done, and to talk through some of these kind of key principles in a bit more detail. But I think, one of the central things I think that we've done over the decades on legacies is to say it's about inspiration, not administration. That's how it's inspiration, not administration. It's about inspiring people about the values that they supported the charity with in the first place, and saying that this is how the future could be. This is how you could leave the future for people, and really, really get them inspired about that. And I think we were saying the other day when we were talking about this session that it should be the most enjoyable communication you have to put together, as someone who believes in your charity's cause, because you can set out to people, this is why we should believe in this charity, this is why this charity matters, and it's that inspiring vision of the future that you're really wanting to get over. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the packs themselves. So I think another thing that we were wanted to quickly do before we talked about the creative itself was just to talk about how to build a really simple legacy strategy. And I think we can probably build this strategy on one side of A4. So this will appeal to everybody who thinks that planning is a bit rather sort of hard work and onerous. So this is one side of A4. Okay, so this is such a simple program, and I think the whole point of it is that you just need to write to people in a direct and focused and obviously sensitive way about legacies, and as part of a sort of proper program of ongoing communications about legacies. And we've developed this program for a range of different charities, from very large to very small ones, and it is very, very effective. And it's also kind of cost effective as well, because it doesn't have to be expensive. You know, I think I would say obviously that you'll probably get the best results if you use an expert agency, but actually the most important thing is to send something, even if you do it in-house, and it'll bring you much better results than just doing nothing. So the basic strategy is this: you need to ask them properly and have an adult conversation with them about legacies. And you need to have a series of direct communications with them about legacies, not just one. So for some people, the right time to ask them will be when you send that first communication, but for others, it may not be. For most people, it may not be. So you need to stay in their minds with that legacy ask for over a period of years. So a basic strategy that works very well is, after a supporter has been on file for maybe about a year, send them the main legacy pack. So it's a main legacy appeal, and we'll talk to you about that in a few minutes, but it's just a main legacy appeal that asks people to consider leaving a legacy and asking them to tell you if they would consider doing that sort of pack. And that is the really sort of all singing, all dancing inspiration pack about why the charity exists, and why they leave their values behind by supporting your charity. So that's that first pack. And then about a year after you've sent that pack, you then send them a reminder pack, a legacy reminder pack, if they've not pledged as a result of that first pack. And that reminder pack can be a much simpler pack. It's simply to remind them of the importance of legacies to your cause. So it could include some of the basic elements of the original pack, like the response form, the reply envelope, and an adaptation of the main letter. And then, as well as that, just something from your charity to show the value of legacies to it. So it could be a letter from a pledger, someone who's already pledged a legacy, to say why they pledged it and why it's so important that they should do it. It could be a report showing what a legacy has helped to achieve for the charity. It could be anything, and those things could be produced in-house. So it's covering letter, something you've grabbed from in-house to show the value of legacies, and a reply envelope and the pledge form. That is all you need in that reminder. And that will go to people who've already received the first pack a year ago. So anybody new to the database in that last year would then get the new pack as well, and then they go on this cycle. And then year 2, 3, 4 will just be variants of that reminder letter. So each year that goes on, you can send them a slightly different covering letter to remind them of the importance of legacies, and a new thing from your charity to demonstrate the importance of legacies. So if you didn't send them a pledge letter in the second year, then send them that this time. If you've got another great report to show how legacies helped, send them that. And it's such a simple strategy, but it works incredibly well. And this obviously goes alongside all your drip feed activity that you're already doing by mentioning legacies in newsletters and all that sort of stuff. We'll talk about stewardship in a bit, but that is a very, very simple legacy plan, and it is incredibly effective. James, I don't know if you'd add anything to that.
No, I would agree with that. The only thing that I would add was, depending on the type of organisation and the context you are, you might have other pools of people other than your donors that are good legacy prospects. So if you have long-term volunteers, for example, people running shops, trustees, former trustees, pensioners, and so on, that have had your cause as a very important part of their life for a long period of time, even if they're not donating right now, then slightly adapted communications to them can be an important part of your strategy as well.
But I think that's a great question. I mean, this is one of the ones I was going to ask you actually, was, who should you mail with legacy appeals? I mean, I mentioned earlier in the conversation that I still think a lot of charities are quite terrified to go beyond certain fairly small groups with their legacy appeals. Who should you mail with legacy appeals?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and there's a context and a practical side of that. So if you've got, I don't know, if you're Care USA, to take an extreme example at one end of the spectrum, where you've probably got 5 or 10 million people on your database, and obviously there's a really large financial charge to not segmenting that. If you're a more typical sort of mid-sized organization with 10, 15,000 people on your database, then you would probably want to you would probably want to mail them all, because there's the costs of production and all that sort of stuff make it more effective. And you will get probably a better response from the people that you'd imagine that you will do longer term supporters, people who you think are older, people who have been around the organisation for a long time. But it's worth mailing into that tail because the costs of doing so are really marginal.
And also, I mean, it's also worth noting that with this is so different from cash appeals or even direct debit appeals, in that, you know, just getting one gift, if the average residuary legacy is about, was it £60,000 or something like that, then, you know, it's the potential of just one response from this, it makes it worth mailing those extra people, even if only one person responds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other group, and I'm assuming that by now people have got nicely GDPR compliant databases, but this is a place where it's worth going quite deeply into your lapsed files as well, because you'll have probably got enough people who are basically people who've retired over the course of their relationship with you. So people who've gone from probably having quite a lot of disposable money to very little, but so have had to cancel a regular gift but haven't stopped caring about you, have an opportunity to carry on that support and retain the connection with the legacy gift. So I would be going a bit deeper into a lapsed file that you have permission to mail than I would do for a lot of other communications.
I think that's a really good point. And I would also say go beyond your donor files, whether lapsed or existing, and actually look at most of the individual contacts that have contact with your organization, because there could be people anywhere that are interested. It could be service users. You have to, obviously, anything with service users you have to be very careful about, but potentially they could have a great affiliation with your organization. It could be people that are volunteering for you, people who've come to events, people that you might otherwise think, well, I wouldn't mail them with a cash appeal because I know that we're not going to get many responses. It doesn't matter if you don't get that many responses from that segment. The key thing is that you might get a handful, and these could be very committed people who really care about the organization. And this is your opportunity to realize the benefit of that. Okay, well, shall we move on to some of the fun bit then, and we'll have a look at one of the packs that we've put together. So we're going to have a look at a pack that we put together. So this is for I was talking about that sort of first all singing all dancing pack that we send to people just to kind of inspire them. And this is one that we did with you, James, when you're at Site Savers. So it's from a couple of years ago now, but I still think it's very relative, and it has the same sort of it covers all the principles that we need to cover in this. So let me just share my screen, and hopefully I can find the right pack. So can you just tell me, James, if you can see that all right? Yeah,
that's come through now, Richard.
Hopefully everyone can. So it looks a bit small at the moment, but I'm going to zoom in on it. But just to sort of roughly explain what's in this pack, then you can see at the top we've got a covering letter. In this case, we normally love long covering letters for appeals, but for this legacy appeal, we've just gone for a two-page letter. What you've got on the right hand side there is the top right is a folder. It's sort of an A5 folder that actually houses a lot of the contents of this pack, and the idea is that it's showing that this may not be an instant decision. When you send people a cash appeal, you're probably wanting them to make an instant decision to send the donation form back and get it back in the post. With legacies, I think it's good to show that the charities appreciates the fact that it could take a while to think about this. This is a big issue to think about. It's an important matter. So it's something where they can keep the materials in, put it on their mantelpiece, and kind of come back to it when they're ready to let you know. And it's also a good way of keeping this pack quite modular, so that you can actually pull new things in, take new things out according to the different audiences or according to when it suits in different mail dates. So that's
a really important point, and it speaks to something that we're not going to focus on here, but just like the practicalities of being a fundraiser and budgets and stuff. So if you do it in this modular way, then you can have a covering letter that remains very current and responsive to whatever's going on right now, and then some elements that have got a really long shelf life, and you're not stuck with a cupboard somewhere full of unusable material that's unusable because 5% of it has gone out of date.
That's a really good point. Thanks, James. And so you've got the folder. So in that folder, there are a few bits. So probably the most important bit is the pledge form. And we'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a bit. So you've got your pledge response form. And then we've got a couple of lift letters. The one on the left is a lift letter from a pledger. So we've gone all in on this first one to offer a letter from somebody who's already pledged, to talk to the potential donor about why they've left the gift. The other letter is from an expert, or I think it could be a celebrity, but an expert in this particular field, to say why it will make such a difference to leave a legacy to this organization. So as with all our fundraising packs, what we try and do is have, if we can, have some supporting voices that are sort of supporting the main message of the pack, that, you know, so giving to this proposition is really important. And if you've got different voices, like a pledger who says, yeah, I agree with this is really important, and an expert, I agree with this is really important, it means that different donors will respond to different voices and will take different voices seriously. So it means that you're hitting the buttons of different people with the one pack. As well as those lift letters, you've got this little thing at the bottom, this site savers, your legacy, the facts. So this is the admin, right? This is the admin of this pack. You've got this little A6 brochure, sort of about 8 pages, and it's a Q&A booklet about legacies and about, you know, how to do it. So that shows, I think, sort of like the balance between inspiration, which is most of the pack, and administration, which is a little bit of the pack. And that really helps, that little booklet. And the final thing that's in the pack, which we'll show you in a bit more detail. So we've got obviously got the reply envelope, which is very key, but you've also got this this leaflet. And the aim of the leaflet is really to try and inspire people to show the history of the organization. So to show the organization has got a credible history to it, and a history of achievement, that it's actually something that's going to be around in the future as well, that is worthwhile to leave legacies to, and that, you know there's a sort of stability in it, but that also is setting out what's going to happen in the future, some of those sort of really overarching goals that it's trying to seek, that are going to inspire people. And we find, we'll show you it in a minute, that the use of a timeline is really handy for this, if you can do it. So, because it helps you to look back over the years to go, well, here are some of our key achievements that will really impact on the donor. But then it enables you to push it to the future, to go, well, look, in 30 years time, in 50 years time, here is what we're aiming to achieve. Here are the big goals that a legacy from you could help us achieve. And so it just links up that sense of credibility and history through to vision in the future really, really effectively. So that's a very brief introduction to the basics of the pack. I thought what it might be worth doing is just maybe talking in a bit more detail about a couple of these items. I think the first one, let's look at the main letter. So if I can just share the letter as well. So where we are, letterhead, right? Okay. So hopefully, can you see that all right, James? Can we see that?
I've still got the full pack shot, and for me, the letter's probably not quite readable, but I have just got a laptop screen. So
okay. What I'll do is I'll stop the share, and then I will share the screen again, and hopefully it will come up with this. How's that? Have we got a letter with pink, with magenta writing on it?
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously the writing is actually not one of the ideas for legacy fundraising is not to write in pink text. That is not a principle that we're going to adopt. This is just for lasering for the pack. But so the idea of this letter is it's a fairly quick letter, and it's just to thank them for the amazing support that they've given, but to summarize this sense of, we really appreciate what you've done, and as someone who understands our work and is clearly driven by our work, the very best way that you could possibly help us is to leave a legacy. And I think the other thing this is trying to do, aside from just showing them a vision of the future that they could help achieve, is to get people to reflect a little bit about their own personal values and vision of what they want to leave behind when they're not around, and to say, well, what is the world you want to leave behind? What are the values you want to see pushing forward in the world when you're not around? And what is the best way of ensuring that those values and that world can happen. And your aim as a charity is to say, well, you know, supporting our charity with a legacy is the most effective way of making those values come to life and to stay there in the world. And I think that's a really, really key thing. And I think that's what we're trying to make this letter do, to say to people. One of the great things about Site Savers at this time was that trachoma was this huge issue, a huge thing to try, an issue that could be solved. So we were able to say to people within this letter, you know, your legacy could, in theory, within 30 years' time, actually help to eliminate this problem from the world. And not many charities get the opportunity to do that. But I think in the time since then, and all the other legacy appeals we've done with charities since, I think every charity has got a vision that they could get across to people that is exciting and that will motivate people. It doesn't have to be, you know, solving a global problem. It could be, you know, for a local hospital, you know, ensuring that people like your loved ones and future generations get the care that they need and that something's there for them in the future. For a wildlife charity, it could be protecting the nature, the natural world that you love. You know, these huge values that people have. You've got to really make them feel that they are the best custodians of those values, and therefore you need to leave them the legacy. And it is simply about talking to them in a direct and sensitive way about leaving a gift, a legacy. I'm not going to go through all the detail of it. I will post some of these examples up on the website once we've finished the call. But I think what I would move towards the end is that, yeah, would you consider making an exceptional commitment and leaving a gift to Site Savers in your will? And like all good direct marketing appeals, it is getting people to go towards the place which is the call to action, which is the response device. So please tell us, even if you're not leaving a gift. So I think we'll get onto the response form in a bit, but we're asking people just to tell the organization how they feel about legacy. So if you're interested in pledging, if you've already pledged, but also if you're not able to do so at this time, because the people who respond with no's, not able to do so at this time, actually can end up being some of the best responders in future, because they've been bothered to tell you, right, no, it's not quite right for me at the moment, but that doesn't mean that it's not quite right now. So that's really worth bearing in mind, and we'll come on to the response form in a bit. It also guides them to coming up with a residuary gift. So that's a really good, so it's pointing them towards the preferred way of giving. And it's just talking to them about, you know, what impact their gift could have. So I think I'll leave it there for the covering letter, because we've got other bits to tell you. But yeah, it's an important part of the pack. I think the other bit that I'd like to show you, if we can, if I can just get the bit up, is the leaflet, because I think this is the bit that you, oops, sorry, got wrong there. Sorry, folks, trying to do lots of bits at the same time here. Right, here we go. So this is a leaflet. Can you see that all right, James?
Yeah.
Okay, so
that's great, Richard.
Sort of imagine that this is kind of a concertina folded leaflet. So this is the outside of it. So on the right hand side is the panel, which is the front. The one second to the right is the back, and these other bits sort of concertina in the main bit. And the main, so I'll just flick down. This is the main spread in the middle of the leaflet. And so it's taking you through the history of Site Savers. They're saying for over 60 years, they've been supporting teams of surgeons to help improve people's sight in countries around the world. And so it's plotting these little milestones of achievement throughout the past to show what a great organization it is to support, the fact that it's stable, the fact that it's got some history to it. And then, as you see, as I was just saying earlier, then on the last couple of panels, it says 2000 today, tomorrow. And so it's pushing that vision through into the future to say, well, this is what we could achieve with your help. So it's quite a simple idea. It's quite a simple idea, and you don't always have to use this sort of timeline idea. But I think for one or two charities that have got those sort of milestones in the past and something specific to aim for in the future, it is quite a useful thing. But as I say, by no means do you have to use that on every pack. The other thing I thought would be worth just quickly showing is the response form, just to show you how we've gone about doing that. Where's the pledge form? There we go. Right, so share again. Right. So I think another thing to mention here is that we have a very short introduction for it, and we've made it very sort of sensitive and confidential to respect the fact that it is a major decision by people. It's a confidential thing, and the first couple of paragraphs just remind people of why they're giving to this. And what we've given people is not too many options, but we've asked people to say, well, have you already included the organization in your will? And if you have, what sort of gift have you given? Just to give us an idea. To say that people intend to make a gift. So that's the sort of pledge. That's the sort of key sort of pledge thing. It's people saying they do not intend to give. And I've said before, that could be an important one in the future. And then to be contacted to discuss the matter further. So this is one way of doing it. I think in the later campaigns that we've done on legacies, what we've tended to do is to try and highlight certain sections of this to kind of really to say to people, you know, this is the one that we'd like you to take, which is the I intend to make a will including site savers. So you can kind of design this even more clearly than we've designed this one, I think. But again, just make it seem like a really sort of uncluttered, undesigned form that is just very, very simple to answer, and that, you know, it gives people no doubt of what they're being asked to do. Was there anything that you'd add to it, James? Anything you'd add to all this?
No, it's interesting to see this pack again. I think the only small comment I would make is roughly where the cursor is at the moment, and is I would like to be contacted to discuss this matter further. I think one of the things to bear in mind is when you start to raise expectations, if you say you're going to phone somebody, if you're going to send something out, if you can put them in touch, just make sure that you can fulfill whatever comes back on this form.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. That's a very good point.
And then there's a question about this coming up in the chat. You need to have a way of storing this information in a meaningful way. I kind of feel that this is a question that you can only ask once, or not. You can say, sorry, there's a decision tree here, right? If somebody has told you that they've included you in their will, then I think you need to make sure that you don't ask them that question every 6 months until they change their mind about doing that. And also, I think, as you perhaps, Richard, want to talk about longer term journeys in a moment, there's elements of personalization that probably come into that longer term journey, depending on what
that's absolutely right. And I think it's worth saying that, you know, if obviously as soon as somebody actually does respond to something like this, they don't receive that pack again. But what you can send them, somebody who has pledged or responded, is a sort of slight variant on the reminder mailing. So when you send the reminder mailings to everyone else, you can say, well, we're sending you, as you've pledged a gift so kindly, just another example of what your amazing pledge gift will help us achieve. So it's actually a way of bolstering up their support and saying, you know, just remind you how brilliant legacies are. So it's not using that reminder as a way of asking them again. It's a way of reminding them again about how great their contribution will be.
Yeah. And just in response to Amy's question in the chat, I would always phrase that turn down question as something I do not intend to do it at this time, or something that's given you an option to ask the question again in the future. But yes, I would definitely rest them out of this communication for a period of time after you've said, after somebody said that they don't intend to do it. But also, it's one of those things, it's the easiest thing to do with this form as a recipient is just to ignore it. So actually somebody taking the time to respond back to you saying I'm not interested at this time is quite a good indicator of engagement with the organisation.
Absolutely. I think another thing that we've learned with these forms since this one as well is that on the question where we ask, have you already, you know, I've already left a gift. There's another question you could say is that I plan to leave a gift but haven't done so yet. And then underneath that you could say, well, would you like any help in just getting that across over the line? So it's kind of that sort of conversion ask as well. But I think again it's about just not having too many asks on that thing. So it's about how you design that response form that's really important. Great. Okay. Well, hopefully that's been useful in just looking at that side of things. I wonder if we could ask one more question, James, just about stewardship. I think, as part of the plan that we were talking about, a very simple legacy plan, I think we would suggest that stewardship should be probably not dissimilar to what you would do for high value donors, in that as soon as someone has pledged a legacy or inquired about legacy, you should be on the phone to them. This is not a situation where you are writing back, oh, thanks for leaving a legacy, or thanks for pledging. You get somebody, either yourself or some, perhaps even the chief executive, to phone up and thank them for it. But to use that call as an exploratory call as well, a way of finding out, well, what sort of relationship does that person want with the organization now that they've pledged to do that with them? Because obviously different people will have different needs of it. Most people will probably just want to be treated as normal and just receive the normal stuff that they get. Some people might want to come to special events. Some people might want to visit from the chief executive. Who knows what they might want? But having that conversation at that point is a brilliant way of showing that you really care about that gift and that you're thanking them personally for it, and about being able to establish a relationship with them if they want that, and also understanding how they want to be communicated with. So again, we would say, have that phone call as soon as you receive any sort of notification of a pledge, because that will really help you build it on. James, is there anything else you'd add about
I agree with that.
Talk about stewardship for quite a long time, couldn't we? But are there any other things?
Just listen to what they're telling you at that point. I think that's really crucial. So I think there's some things that can go wrong at this point, I think there's some of the things that can go wrong with major donor fundraising as well. So whatever you've been doing so far in how you've been talking to this person, how you've been, how they've engaged with your cause, has got them to the point where they've put you in their will, or you're thinking of doing so. They're thinking of doing so, right? So they like you. So don't stop doing all the things that they've liked about you. So I've seen, don't suddenly drop them from mailing lists and think, oh no, it's not the finish line. And again, in that call, just listen to what they're telling you about how they want to be contacted, what they like about the organization, some people might want to engage with you as like your major donors will. Some of them just want to stay very much in the background. You might want to sort of drop them into a slightly different communications path with the legacy stewardship. So again, I think don't keep asking people the same question once they've already answered it. So, make sure you've got a way of knowing it if you're going to answer the questions, retaining that memory. Simultaneously, so don't forget it, but don't mention it all the time. I think there's a tendency perhaps as well to start playing with personalization in direct mails and starting to say things like, as somebody who's put site savers in your will, you must be particularly interested in our current appeal in Zimbabwe or whatever it is. So just be gentle with how often you talk about it. And then, sorry, I had a final point that's just flown out of my mind there, unfortunately. Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, depending again on the complexity and segmentation of your mail campaign. I don't know exactly the organizations that you're representing, but if you've got quite a conventional mail campaign and you've probably got high value packs and high value major donor type communication programs, you might want to drop them in there so they're being stewarded in a different way, but you don't tell them that they're being stewarded in a different way because they've left you a legacy. They just start to get slightly higher quality stuff from you.
Yeah, and of course, what we're talking about here is a sort of simple plan to get the best benefits from legacies and keep it simple. You can go obviously way more complex than this if you want, but this will get you results, and I think that's the key thing that we're talking about at the moment. Yeah. Okay, so I guess the final question, I guess perhaps we could quickly cover, James, is what we've been talking about up to now is generally kind of communications to existing contacts that you've got on the database. Are you a sort of a fan of like recruiting, of going beyond that and actually using, recruiting people directly to legacies, sort of recruiting supporters directly to legacies?
Yeah, I think that's really, context specific question. So I wouldn't do that first for virtually anybody. I think there's a kind of progression. So I think you talk to the people that are closest to you first, and that's trustees, former trustees, people who volunteered with you for 20 years, people who've been giving to you for 20 years and so on. Then you widen the net out into the more a direct marketing type approach, then I think it depends a little bit on the cause and how you sit in the public perception, really. So I think there are certain types of causes, probably either very locally focused ones, so hospices and things, or very single issue ones, where you'll have got a lot of people that either live in your area or are very passionate about the issue that aren't really connected to the organisation. And I think if you can figure out how to talk to them in other ways, you can also talk to them about legacies and pick stuff up like that. But one, care is a good example of this, right? So if you're in Care Germany, then Care Germany is kind of in the same place in the public psyche as the RNLI is in the UK. And so actually you can talk to people directly about legacies there, because there's so much of the work of why you're a good idea has already been done. Whereas if you're in the UK, you just can't do that. So have a kind of reflect on what the context is that you're offering, and do some of the basic stuff first, but certainly don't rule it out. And you see legacy DRTV, you see legacy off the page adverts. There are organizations that are not fools of recruiting people directly onto legacies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say it's well worth testing. Once you've got your legacy program established to your existing supporters, which is obviously the key thing, always to go to the warm people first, that actually it is well worth testing, as you say, in these different ways. I think off the page is a really useful way of doing it, as our Facebook advertising can be really useful for this. It's just like drip feeding the message, but having a sort of direct way of actually responding to things. So there's some ideas there about how you can move that program on.
And as we've said before, it doesn't take, you can get a massive ROI with a very small response rate with legacies. So it doesn't have to hit home very many times to be financially worthwhile.
Yeah, brilliant.